My unpopular opinion is that the whole medical profession is bought and paid for by Big Pharma, and Big Pharma is run by psychopaths. And when I say psychopaths, I mean the worst sort of psychopaths. I'm sick of reading reports about rapists and paedophiles and child pornographic images and sex parties, and these people run the show. And
David, you shared some interesting news on your X a few days ago. I thought we could go straight into it. What was that, and how has that affected you?
are we talking DBS?
Yeah,
Yeah, so yeah, the
DBS. Yeah.
viral video, it's got a lot of attention. So as I covered in the video, it's a long story, and I'm sure we'll sort of go front to back to front on it, as it were. Yeah, got struck off as a doctor. That's just I still haven't got used to the idea, because usually when you get struck off, you've harmed a patient, or you've committed a crime, or something to that effect, or something really serious to get the equivalent sanction of Harold Shipman. But yeah, I've got struck off for harassment, which was basically me calling out TV doctors, or doctors that were spreading misinformation, in my humble opinion. Um, and the interest there was safeguarding them to honour my Hippocratic oath of do no harm. And I wrote some letters, just a small number of vaccine. There weren't even vaccine exemptions. The charge I've been found guilty of is falsifying medical notes, when I didn't falsify anyone's notes. I didn't touch anyone's medical records. I wrote a standalone letter to Sunil just saying I believe this person really needs to get to New York City. Their daughter and firstborn granddaughter are dying from an unexpected labour. These were never checked. The GMC didn't have the dates of these things to be able to tell me what rule I'd actually broken and what the eligibility criteria were. That said, they still found me guilty anyway, and that's the headline of it. So that's led to either the sanction of immediate erasure. I'm a danger to patients, even though there were no patients. I've brought the profession into disrepute, ironically, and I've negatively affected public confidence in the profession, which is quite a bizarre set of statements. They did bring in the big guns, like I won't go into that much detail on that. That subsequently led to an automatic referral. I understand that if you've been struck off by a regulator, it should trigger that. If I was a harassing, bullying, vile creature, which I'm not, but nonetheless, I was referred to it anyway. At Halloween, funnily enough, there's never any coincidences. Halloween, I get a knock on the door, sign for this, sign for it. It's a letter from the DBS, and anyone who doesn't know, that's for criminals. To be on the DBS list, you have to have committed a crime and been convicted. Or the other thing I found out, which was news to me, to be honest, was that you have to be on that list if you've caused harm. So it has to pass the harm test, and the harm test towards vulnerable adults and children. Now, bearing in mind the 5 complainants were three doctors or scientists, 1 practice manager, and I just called that lady out for discriminating against me. She called me a rabid anti-vaxxer in an email. That was all I called her out on it. And these vax exemptions, and to suddenly then being considered to be on the DBS barred list, which is for criminals and perverts, and it's basically to screen employees that they're not convicted criminals or been severe misconduct. I mean, the worst of the severe misconduct I was, when you look into AI to say what was the worst thing David Cartland did that correlated to severe misconduct, the best I can get is that I called an obstetrician, one of my victims, an evil witch for essentially saying that the vaccine was essentially 100% safe in pregnancy, knowing that pregnant women were not included in those trials, so they were lab ratting pregnant women. That's a fact. That's a fact. So I've been put on the DBS list. Much to my surprise, I put together a great case involving such, it wasn't even controversial. It was like no crime, no conviction, no abuse, no harm, no children, no vulnerable adults. So hence, do one. Hey, jog on, this is not relevant to me. But that didn't seem to matter. I even went to the trouble of getting 10 references from safeguarding leads, foster carers, primary school teachers, MPs, head teachers, and even a couple of consultant paediatricians into the mix, saying this is absurd. What are you doing? This is not relevant. This is a misuse of the DBS. Nonetheless, DBS found me guilty, and without a conversation, they've just used the GMC's MPTS determinations. Bearing in mind that's not a court of law; it's an employment tribunal. And ironically, a few weeks ago, I was emailed by the GMC to tell me that a case that I'd reported to them about a doctor abusing and maliciously communicating about me, they're not going to investigate, because guess what? We are a medical regulator and we do not do harassment. I've got it in black and white. I've also got it in the HCPC decision about a stalker that they're not that bothered about what people get up to social media. This is the equivalent of the GMC, but for not doctors, for paramedics and ophthalmology practitioners, for example. And yeah, that was a surprise to hear that, from the HCPC you're hearing that they don't do social media spats as they told me in the letter, and then you've got the GMC saying we don't do harassment. If you think Dr. X is harassing you, go to the police and go to the civil system. And you've got to remember, in the last few weeks, there's been a flurry of really unusual let-offs by the GMC. So it was always my concern that they're letting off rapists because they're one-off rapes. They're letting off sexually lewd acts in doctors, for example, anaesthetists that nip out of their procedure while the patient's under and are amorous with a nurse, let's say, and pop back in and top up the propofol. Let off. Doctors who are castrating women in, I think this was in Guernsey or Blackpool maybe. I know they're two different, quite far apart. I can't remember the exact case, but they're let off without so much as a slap on the wrist. And you look at all the sexual misconduct cases, and most of the doctors with sexual misconduct cases get short suspensions. There's just been an overturn of a doctor that sexually harassed prophetically through his career, profusely should I say, and he was warned in 2011, I think it was, for 3 or 4 cases. He's done another 6 sexual harassment cases. GMC suspended. MPTS wanted to uphold the suspension, but then the Court of Appeal somehow got involved and have let him back to work. So the GMC and MPTS had to strike off. They wanted to upgrade his thing, and they've actually said let him off. So that said, I'm here for 5 letters that the GMC never held and 4 cases of he said, she said, 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, which I demonstrated. Now you've got to remember the GMC didn't allow any of my witnesses to speak. I had 6 of them. So even murderers, the prosecution were telling us that we were not allowed to use our defence witnesses, all of them. They just said irrelevant and inadmissible. Now that's pretty extreme. Murderers are allowed to present their defence. They also told me my own witness rebuttal was irrelevant and inadmissible, but we'll let you use about 20% of your own defence as you fight for your career. So and they brought in the big guns, like I say, head of the CPS London, highest barrister in the land. They brought in, ironically, the GMC barrister was a homicide and terrorist barrister. You can't get any more ironic than that. And so anyway, the DBS, just going back to the original question, the DBS have made their decision. I'm on this list now. Absolutely appalled by it, really. And now I get to appeal at the High Court, but that has now led to subsequent ripple effects. So because you've been put on this children's barred list, meaning I can't work with children ever again, this is indefinite, you can only appeal in 10 years' time, and vulnerable adults. And then I find that the FA have got involved. So obviously I'm a referee, I volunteer. It's the only thing I do that keeps me sane since the strike. I can't even get a paper round because people Google me and do it. If your viewers just Google me, you'll see what I'm up against. Some of the trash media that's gone in. I'm just a guy down in Cornwall. I'm a family man, Christian guy, Christian values. I've never bullied anyone. I've retaliated. I'll put my hands up. I've retaliated to trolls when prompted to, when poked enough. And what the GMC did was they framed the retaliation. And anyone who knows my Twitter handle will see that day in, day out, I've got 30 to 40 full-time stalkers that go from anything to do with malicious communicating and calling me names. I've been compared to Adolf Hitler. People put my face on Ian Huntley. I've been put on latest because I've been put on the list. My face has appeared on images of Jimmy Savile. There's a picture that gone around today that I've been in bed with Jimmy Savile. This is this is what I've been put up. This is what I'm having to allegedly just ignore. But anyway, the FA thing's hurt me the most. It's a minimum wage job. It's a hobby, not a financial thing. It's, like I say, I have to travel an hour to a football match to referee 22 aggressive chaps on a football pitch and then youth football on a Sunday. Essentially, their decision is, look, our hands are tied at county level. But the FA have got wind of this. So somebody from DBS, I had the letter saying that they're going to breach the GDPR and let them know. Luckily, I already had done. And they've now banned me. I've never heard any sanction like it. I'm banned from all football activities. So I was about to come out of retirement to show my skills off in a very casual flexi league situation in Cornwall, for a team. I'm 43 now. I wasn't exactly going to, play like David Beckham. But, I just wanted to get a run out and actually meet some folks that are local. It would have been good for my mental health because this has been pretty isolating. That said, they actually told me categorically I'm not allowed to play football. Football players don't have to be registered with the DBS. To play football, is a personal choice. They're telling me because of all that I've just spoke about before. I'm not allowed to play football. I've received instruction today. I'm allowed to take my son to football on Saturday, and I'm allowed to stay as long as I stay quiet. That's what I've been told. I'm allowed to passively spectate the match, whatever that means. So
Wow.
it's just, this is like Orwellian on steroids. It's been bad enough being struck off for what I count as nothing. I really do. I mean, I'm an insightful person. I will reflect and say, look, as I just did, I did retaliate on wisely occasions when prompted to. But the GMC didn't look at what Dave Cartland's reasons for saying things were. And that's where we're at now. So I'm, and then subsequently child services, because you've been put on a children's barred list. Obviously, your parenthood is then looked at. We haven't had the call yet, but we expect it. So all from these original crimes, this kind of domino effect has happened to me where I can't get my head around it. I just don't understand what's happening here, because, I'm just Dave Cartland down in Cornwall. Why have I received this attention? And I ask around the other doctors who spoke out. They've had their sanction. They've been struck off. They've accepted it. They didn't want to work as doctors anyway now in the current system.
Yeah.
But they've stopped at that. My stalking has stepped up, and when I've tried to ignore the stalkers or tried to report the stalkers, anyone who wants to have a look at any of them, just look at my Twitter feed. You'll see it's unrelenting. And when I did try to ignore them, they're contacting children's services, the FA, police, ex-wives, neighbours. They're contacting surgeries that I worked at, trying to dig for dirt. Journalists are contacting my ex-wife, asking for dirt on me. And it's like, give the guy a break. I've just lost my career. When you think about how long it takes to be a doctor, I started training, trying to think back now, 2001. I qualified in my first degree. I got first class honours in biomedical science at the same medical school that I did medicine at, Birmingham. Got first class honours and then went into a master's, medical research, published scientist in angiogenesis, and then subsequently got into medical school on the graduate entry course, a slightly shorter version of the generic 5 years, and qualified again with high marks, really high marks, and then became a GP, again achieving high marks in the exam. You've got to remember, I've not had a complaint from anyone in terms of patients, doctors. I've got an exemplary clinical and academic record, yet here we are sat here unemployed and unemployable. I can't accept that, and the problem I've got is that, for example, when I was struck off, they give you an option to appeal. I've just sat through a 6-week kangaroo court and watched them we read out death threats at the start. We read out threats of violence towards me. We read out an email that was very sinister, and I'll share it with you now. It said, and I remember it because, this thing haunts me. It said, "We are a group of doctors and scientists on the X/Twitter platform charged with keeping misinformation off the platform related to COVID-19. Dr. Cartland is a particularly odious example of somebody spreading misinfo," or words to that effect, which is why he became a target of our network. So anyway, they went away and deliberated. The request from us was, can we make this behind closed doors? Dave's having active police crime numbers against stalkers. The GMC let the stalkers watch the tribunal. My PA wrote to the MPTS saying, you're letting his stalkers, they're literally celebrating his demise. They're taking weeks off work to watch who these people are and who they work for. I haven't worked out if they're sadistic psychopaths or there's someone paying them. It's one or the other, or a blend of the two. But either way, it's sinister. The first thing the GMC did was said, you're not allowed your witnesses. In response to me reading out the threats, they made a decision after deliberation to actually keep it all public for me. I was to be known as Dr. David Cartland throughout. The cameras were rolling whenever I spoke on my barrister, but any of their cross-examinations or statements were behind closed doors. In fact, they were given vulnerable witness status, and they were called Dr. A, B, and C because they were given anonymity orders as well. So the public don't even get to know who these people are. Have you heard anything like this? Where'd you go with it?
David, I think I've got so many questions. I suppose to start is the harassment, if you like, charges with the doctors, because like you said about Google, Googling your name before, I did that before this podcast. I obviously follow you on X, and I knew pretty much most about your case. I watched your video, and then I tried to put myself in the other camp, so the anti-Dave Cartland camp, and tried to think, and the evidence that's anyway at least shown online, and from what you said, it is atrocious. I've never, like, I honestly thought you must have done. There must be at least something that I really tried, and I tried ChatGPT. I went on normal Google. I went through articles, and the information that was given for your reason to be struck off is so limited. It's so ambiguous. It's really not clear.
Well, I'll
And
give you one example.
it's something that.
Oh, sorry, let's talk over you. Sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. I just wanted to really ask about the four people. I did not realize what they were TV. Well, a couple of them were TV people, and like, how does that make sense? Because anyone could critique somebody on TV.
No, allegedly not. There's more layers to this. It went beyond the GMC tribunal into civil court. There's one individual I categorically can't speak about, and that's that person for reasons of yeah, I just can't. I can tell you about the other three quickly. Number one was an
Okay.
obstetrician who went on public campaign saying that the vaccine was 100% safe in pregnancy. Very proud, very smarmy when she was doing her interviews, promoting it. And I just questioned her. She came to my life because she made an unsolicited contact with my then business partner, setting up my website for health coaching and private stuff. She basically said I was a nutter. I'll paraphrase, I was a nutter conspiracy, just to let you know that your business partner is a crazy. So that's when I started looking into her and found that she was this jab pusher in pregnancy. And I said, look, and I wrote to her, I emailed her very politely. The GMC have the email. And the GMC spoke to me and said, no, sorry, I said to her, can you please send me the vaccine safety data in pregnancy? I might have missed it. I stand to be corrected. If you don't send it to me, I'll report you to the GMC like you have me. That was marked down as guilty that I, quote, threatened retaliation.
Dave, why did she report that in the first place? I had this point where you already on X saying, "Don't get the jab if you're pregnant." Why did you come on her radar?
To be fair, I wrote 3 tweets about her. So the point with her was that I wrote 3 tweets about her, and I can tell you what they were. I actually put an image of her and said, "Liar, liar, your bum's on fire." I'll own that. It was a bit silly. Right. The second time I retweeted her advertising an antenatal clinic saying, "Go and get jabbed if you're pregnant," and I retweeted it and I said, pile on. And so then suddenly I became responsible for everyone's comments, and they called that incitement, which I can understand. Again, I own these things, and people were saying some pretty nasty stuff, but it was them, not me. Have a word with them if they say something about Nuremberg, for example. And then thirdly, I put, please thank Dr. X for inflicting spike protein upon your newborn baby. Now, this person retaliated by 17 tweets. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I was Harold Ship.
Wow.
Harold Ship. Well, just the numbers, isn't it? 3v17. How can the person writing 3 tweets be found guilty of perpetrating harassment to the person? And by the way, a lot of her other content to her complaint was from my private Telegram group. So it's as private as a chat down the pub.
Right.
She somehow got access, and so had one of the other complainants had got access to my private Telegram group, and they were lifting things from that. And that my argument was that's private conversation. It's you need a code to get into A, what you're doing in there, and B, this is not public. I'm not quoting this on Twitter. So this the evil witch comment about her was a private Telegram group conversation. I called her an evil witch. I stand by that. Anyone promoting jabs and pregnant women, So that was 17 of one and 3 of the other. I was found guilty. The other one I can speak about fairly openly. I can't name the person, but they're a well-known troll. They operate a network of trolls on X. You may have probably come across them if you've done anything like Defend Me. And they descend on you from every angle, or say anything anti-COVID vaccine, you will get descended on by these accounts. I've got little Easter Island emojis. You've probably seen them if you've supported me. The guy who runs that is my other victim. So victim number 2 is the leader of this group. They're called the Mutton Crew. Very childish, I know. He's a sheep farmer. Now, this guy's responsible for reporting another one of my colleagues in Ireland. As we speak, it's going live at the Irish Medical Council. He's been ejected from that trial because he's the only witness for the prosecution, and the prosecutor has said he's a liability, he's an unreliable witness, and he's a controversial character. Now, this is on the basis of information I sent to the GMC. So he tweeted about me probably in the order of 400 to 500 times. He created parody accounts using my image with horns coming out of my head and drool coming down and makeup on and all sorts of incarnations of parodies. One day I've created a parody account in retaliation about him. Now, the GMC ignored the fact he'd created them about me. He said Dr. Cartland found a new way of bullying this doctor. He created parody accounts about him and posted as if he was him. I mean, the account lasted about 2 hours before it got shut down by Twitter. But the fact is, I sent in 3 portfolios of evidence against this man. I sent in a portfolio of tweets about me, calling me every name under the sun. I won't bore you with them. There's nothing the man hasn't called me. Abusive, malicious stuff. Secondly, I did the same to show it was a course of conduct. He's done it to other doctors, such as Mike Yeadon, Ryan Cole, Pierre Corey. No one has been left alone by this individual and his minions. And finally, he couldn't get any lower but go into the vaccine injury groups and calling them malingerers and liars and why are you lying about.
Wow.
So this was with the GMC saying this is this character. And you've accused David Cartland because he retaliated once. I won't. Am I allowed to swear on this? Can I
Yeah.
So essentially, he's a sheep farmer. So I said once in retaliation, leave me alone, you sheep shagger. That was it. And I admit that. I put my hand up, yeah. But guess what the charge was? Dr. Cartland has been publicly stating that Dr. X is a purveyor of bestiality. I was found guilty for accusing a scientist of sheep molestation, and it was a throwaway comment. This is what they did. You see what they did with the email to the doctor, and it goes on like that. So this guy, for 400 and 500 tweets about me and other doctors and vaccine injured, and they ignored that. They said it's not relevant. It's what you said. So forget the provocation. You called him a sheep shagger, and that was it. So, and it went on. The third doctor I can briefly say is a doctor that really I don't see much in the way of harassment. I can't even give examples other than I asked this doctor's opinions on things that, were to do with Pride events. That's all I can say, and just saying, is this appropriate? And that was all. And that moving on from that, there was a practice manager. I applied for a job. I've got quite a decorated CV, being an A&E doctor at a senior level, GP. Also, I'm a published author. I'm a published scientist. I teach medical students. I do minor ops. There's nothing I don't do. I'm kind of all singing, all dancing. Perfect doctor for down in Cornwall, really, because I haven't got many of either. And she rejected my application within about 2 hours of applying. This application had been out for 9 months, this job, and it's particularly bad surgery.
Right.
And she called me a raving anti-vaxxer, and she said, you don't align with our views. We're a pro-vaccine ethos. Good luck with the rest of your job search. Cheerio. I got a bit offended by that. So I actually because I was working in the urgent care centre where they send all their patients down because they've got no access, they've got no doctors. So I put up the email, I redacted the details, I put up the email saying if you can't get a job at a patient, an appointment at this place, it's because they reject applications from good doctors. I put that across 6 platforms at 2 different times. So 3 platforms on one day, 3 platforms on another. If you look at the 17 charges, I was found, have a look at it, it's publicly available. At the top of the MPTS determination, the 17 charges. Charge 1 was Dr. David Cartland owned this Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook handle. That's not a charge. The headline was Dave Cartland was found guilty of 17 charges of misconduct. The other 6 that I mentioned were because I posted this email 6 times in different places at different times. Now, they were fully redacted. This woman contacted the GMC 4 times and was rejected. And on the 5th occasion, gets even better, somebody walks in anonymously into her surgery with an envelope, which can only be described as the worst Photoshop ever, of a tweet I'd made. And apparently I'd put out her personal details. I can't remember exactly. I didn't do it. I just wouldn't. It's not part, GDPR is extremely serious. Because I named the surgery, she received hate mail. The hate mail was a letter from Mr. Mike Yeadon. Mike Yeadon, the Pfizer, ex-Pfizer. There was a letter, multiple signatures from World Council for Health, signed by people like Pierre Corey, Tesla, etc., and a local chap in Truro who basically all 3 letters were to furnish this woman with the Pfizer data. Very polite. I've seen them myself in the evidence bundles. She called it hate mail. It was accepted as hate mail. I've incited hate mail. I mean, this just gets more twisted. Anyway, I was found guilty of harassing her. They asked me to do a rebuttal. I wrote a 25-page rebuttal. If you look at the MPTS tribunal, you can see Dr. David Cartland did not file a witness statement bundle for this case. I beg to differ. I've got read receipts from the lawyer, the investigations officer, of a 25-page, and I worked all night doing that many months ago, going through sentence by sentence. I actually had a digital analyst look at the screenshot, and they said it's a Photoshop. So the GMC had this, but decided to completely ignore it. So if we're looking at the case now, we've got a guy who's just been kicked out of the Irish Medical Council. We got 3 of one and 17 of the other, as in he said, she said, and I was found guilty. We've got this spurious, dodgy Photoshop, and that's the reason they struck me off. Found me guilty in her case. I released public information into the public domain. That's where the 4 previous complaints had fallen down. I just posted, an email which they said was within my right. And then you look at the falsification of medical notes for money. That was the original complaint. This gets even more sinister. They book in an actor to come to my consultation, and they're texting me after a brief conversation that we had, asking for a vaccine exemption certificate to get to Canada for an urgent life or death interview. He asked me, because he didn't have a medical reason, what I could do for him. I said, I don't do them for medical reasons. I do standalone letters of support for bodily autonomy, valid refusal of consent with capacity, and finally, primum non nocere, first do no harm, and I believe these vaccines to be harmful. These were given to 5 individuals previous to that. I've owned up to this with the GMC.
Right.
Now, the conversation went on. I offered him a consult to discuss it further if he wished. It says in the exchange I do them pro bono, so I don't know where the for money came from and the falsifying medical notes. And that was it. And I won't repeat in front of your viewers, but the bottom message was, I've got a caravan to sell you for when you lose your home. See you next Tuesday. That was missing from the GMC's version of the WhatsApp exchange, and it ended up in the hands of the sheep farmer doctor and another doctor, 2 of my 3 victims. Now, 2 of my 3 victims have somehow decided to follow my ex-wife, who suddenly created a Twitter account and badmouths me about parenting and what a complete scumbag I am. And again, you look at all of her followers, she's got 50, and they're all this group of people, all the prominent trolls. I mean, it gets deeper and deeper, but they found me guilty of falsifying medical notes, and we said to the GMC, go on then, show us one, show us a document. Well, we haven't got one. We've just got Dave's admission and these WhatsApp exchanges. So it's a pretty serious accusation. I mean, I've spoken to a doctor today who gave thousands out. All the Irish doctors telling me, oh yeah, we gave loads of vaccine exemptions out. They're not struck off. You can use your own your own autonomous practice, and yet they've made an example of me. Now, I'll give you one example about the woman who went to see in New York. Her daughter and granddaughter were really, really sick, and she needed to be over there. So I wrote the letter. None of these people had to show their letter at Border Patrol. It was kind of an insurance policy in their handbag. They were given pro bono. And the GMC, the reason it's gone to DBS, as I said earlier, is it's because I've flouted international regulations mid-pandemic and allowed my own ideology around the vaccines to enter the equation. How dare I? How dare I? Now, like I say, they don't know what year I wrote them, let alone what date and what month. As you know, the international regulations were Nazi-esque in some countries and completely non-existent in others, and it kept changing. The same as the eligibility criteria. Doctors were not giving them, but didn't know why they weren't giving them. They just thought that they'd get into trouble for doing them. There was never a set-in-stone eligibility criteria because they were vaccinating people who'd had an anaphylactic shock or near to or clots after one of the vaccines. They'd get the same brand next time round. So this is where we're at. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if any of that sounds like I'm a bullying harasser, but that's not what the BBC said. And you've got to remember the GMC don't do it. Oh, no. GMC don't do harassment.
No, not at all. I mean, this is crazy. I knew some of the story. I'd followed your ex for a while and I've read about your story, but I haven't heard it in this much detail, and it is terrifying in so many ways. And the whole time you've been speaking, I just keep thinking to myself, why? Like, how did this happen? And is it literally just tweets against the vaccine? Is it just because you were not for the COVID vaccine?
Well, I held some really controversial views. I had controversial views around lockdowns being pointless, unprecedented, and all the collateral damage therein of financial issues, mental health issues. And I saw that in real life. I had loads of people trying to kill themselves because of lockdown. Secondly, I had some controversial views on masks. They don't work. Simple. They don't work, and they're actually quite dangerous because you become hypoxic and hypercapnic within quite a short amount of time of putting them on. I was marched out of a surgery actually for not wearing a mask, and I'm trying to tell the matron, look, I've got files on my phone that I've got ready for the jobs worth when they come for me. I said, they put a mask on, Dr. Cartland. Well, they don't work. Why? Well, look at the holes in them, for starters, etc., etc. So I had second view was masks, and I stayed in my lane for these 6 things. Children, pregnant women. Why are we giving it to them? Where's the data before we start lab-ratting these very, very, very sacred groups of patients? Where's the data? Pregnant women were excluded. Children were excluded. Under 30s were excluded. Over 50s were excluded. Anyone with any comorbidity was excluded from the trial. And that's just scratching the surface of the shenanigans of the Pfizer trial. I mean, it's It's the worst piece of medical research and so corrupt in history. So that was that. Pregnant women and children, pregnant women who aren't allowed to do anything but sit, eat healthy food, not eat soft cheese or uncooked fish and all the rest of it. But they can have one of these novel mRNA jabs that go around the whole body, committing all sorts of carnage. And I'm sat there hearing my colleague saying 100% safe in pregnancy. She's actually running a trial 8 months after she made that comment called I won't say actually because you'll identify from it, but a trial that basically says, is it safe in pregnancy? So hang on, you're admitting by that you don't know, and I begged her for this data, and that was me threatening her retaliatory action to a female colleague, making it sound like I'm some sort of bullying misogynist. What else did I have views on? I had views on, that was the fifth. Vaccine injured. That was it. I sat in my Penzance surgery watching people coming into my room telling me they were injured from the vaccine, telling me I wasn't telling them. They were saying, Doc, and I had everything from I've just not been right from, the minute I've had that jab in my arm all the way through to death and everything in between. I'm the one calling up the husband of a woman who died, 42, with VIT, vaccine-induced thrombocytic thrombocytopenia. Death certificate says VIT induced by the AstraZeneca jab. This was my eureka moment when I really got angry and spoke out loudly. There's a second death in the week of another 40-year-old, and then there was a male who collapsed in town, had a seizure. He had a cerebral venous thrombosis, a big clot in his head, the day after his Zeneca. So here we've got 2 Zeneca deaths, and we've got a Zeneca cerebral venous thrombosis in a 41-year-old male. I'm telling the neurosurgeon, well, he had his jab yesterday, you don't think it could be that, do you? And he said, you're not one of those anti-vaxxers, are you? That's the response I got. I went running to my boss, who's a very decorated senior guy, and I remember to this day, I've said it on all the interviews, his answer was, well, what do you want me to do? He threw his hands up, what do you want me to do about it? The show must go on. And that very weekend in Cornwall, they administered probably around 500 AstraZeneca jabs to the unwitting, unknowing members of the Penzance community. It's sick. It's absolutely sick, and yet here I am. These other doctors, by the way, are still practicing, earning lots of money, still trolling the internet bully that I talked about earlier. And here I am, not even allowed to play football when you put it into context. Let alone so I've been given permission today to take my son to football and watch as long as I'm quiet and observe passively. So I said to them, could I not even tell him to, if he's playing too far up the pitch, call him back, you're too far up the pitch. He said, no, you can't. What is this dystopia I'm describing to you? I don't know anyone else who's had DBS listing for writing exemptions. DBS, as I said, it's for criminals.
Dave, do you think, just listen to it, it's just like, it's mind-boggling what's happened to you. I mean, I've had quite a few people on this podcast over the last year. We've actually had somebody who had a vaccine injury, Alex Mitchell, and he won money back from the UK government. We've had we've had lots of people who their lives, just because their views on COVID, have been absolutely ruined. Whether it's actors, entrepreneurs, anything. I've had so many people who've come on this podcast whose lives, what I'm trying to say is, do you think if you said what you said back in 2020, back in 2021, 2020, if you said that now, do you think you'd be suffering the way you have suffered?
No, I think there's, every doctor I know is awake to this now. They're just, the most common thing I get now used to be, I can't speak out because of the pension, the money, the kids are in private school. That was the sort of first year or two. And that very quickly turned around to, well, we've seen what they've done to you and your comrades. It's probably been about 10 or 11 doctors in the UK that spoke out publicly. Every one of them, I was the last but one man standing. The last one is Asi Malhotra. And he's about to get done. He's about to get hauled in front of, he's preparing his document. And this is reports. These are doctors that have gone after him. When I look at bearing in mind I had no complaints prior to speaking out, I ended up with 256 complaints to the GMC in about a 3-month period. And I'm having to answer all of these. And all they were, when I looked at most of them, were Dave Cartland is spreading misinformation. He is bringing the profession into disrepute, etc., etc. They brought, of those 256 charges, they brought those 5 that we've talked about, inflated them into 17 charges. Go through it. Anyone, I hope anyone reads the MPTS. And when you read it, just ask yourself in your mind's eye, you're hearing all about this vile Dr. Cartland and everything he's done, but why? There's no context here. I watched as my colleague Dan Armstrong presented 3 days of his own testimony. Not a word of it ended up in the determination. Not a word. The guy got struck off for, you look it up, Dr. Daniel Armstrong, a forensic psychiatrist in his 30s. He was struck off at the peak of his powers up in North England. And he was struck off, look it up, BMJ said Dr. Daniel Armstrong was struck off for questioning the safety and efficacy of the COVID vaccine. And all he did was he did a one video, and they had about 2,000 people watch it. It was on Vimeo. You can't watch Vimeo now in the UK, I don't think. And yeah, that was it. He got struck off. And then the week after I'm in front of them, they say, well, Dr. Cartland's case is not about his views on COVID. In fact, he's entitled to have them. I'm like, what about Dan last week and Mohammed Adil the few weeks before that? You know, but you're telling me my case is not about COVID, even though it's about calling out 3 doctors and scientists that have said things about COVID that I'm incorrect, in my opinion. You know, I've called out a practice manager that's discriminated against me because of my views on COVID, and I've written exemptions, well, letters of support for COVID. So how on earth is my case not about COVID? But they've been very careful to leave. They've left the best till last because they know that people like Asim and myself, we can fight our corner, and we're eloquent and we know our stats. So they really didn't want to come after me on the basis of misinformation because they know I know all the data. They know I've got all the citations that, you know, for example, we know the vaccine ends up crossing the placenta. We know it's in breast milk. We know it's found in the fetus. And then you're reading papers saying, well, we know all this, but we don't think there's any consequence. This is what's happened to science in the last few years. We found it in the breast milk. We found mRNA and we found spike protein, but we don't think it's harmful. We don't think. Well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. If I went to my bloody research doctor and said, I don't think that cancer drug's curing cancer, or, you know, I think it is, you know, that's not how you do science, is it? It's beyond a reasonable doubt because you're going to give it to patients ultimately. And it's quite ironic, all of this, everything's been centered around my Hippocratic oath. This is why I call my book Do No Harm, because that's central to everything. And it's to my own detriment because I get called a grifter. I can tell you for sure, I lost a 10 grand a month salary and I earn, well, I won't say what I earn publicly, but about a tenth of that, a fraction, scratching about on social media, bits and bobs. And that's where we're at, you know, and we've had to change our life a lot. And we came down here for the better life. And I just couldn't, people say to me, you know, could you have kept quiet? No, I couldn't have. You've got to look as well at the GMC. They are supposed to be, when you think about who they're there for, they are a regulator that basically are there to maintain public confidence in the profession. Making decisions like letting off rapists and persecuting me like they have doesn't really look good. Second to that, they're a charity regulator. Guess who they happen to invest in? Merck, AstraZeneca, Nestle, Pepsi. This is not a neutral organisation. They're investing in big pharma. You know, and you look at some of the complainants they had. Big pharma conflicts of interest, you know, particularly the sheep farmer.
Yeah. I mean, Dave, how, like, one thing I found really striking, I did not know how central the doctors were in your case. I did not realize it was the reason you're essentially. I just presumed it was a bunch of people who were so pro the jab, like the types who were calling the police on people when they saw gatherings on their neighbors or whatever. I just presumed it was a lot of those people. Only until today, when I was doing a bit of reading before that, I realized it was actually doctors that this happened to. Why did doctors do this specifically to you? Like, was there like I just don't understand. Is it like a financial thing? Because you know, as a doctor, far more about people's health. And the doctors I've spoken to, that I've been fortunate enough to, there's so many that I've been so surprised. Back in 2020, I was very anti-lockdowns. I was very anti the COVID measures that were being put in place. I hated lockdowns. I hated what they were doing. Very early on, I was very against it. The jab was the only thing that I was very on the fence of. I was probably more leaning to getting it than not. But I was so surprised at the amount of doctors I knew that were against the jab. And I was like, wow, like I would never have presumed, or people at least in, maybe not doctors, but people in medical backgrounds. And I was like, wow, I would have presumed you'd be the guys that would be telling me when I'm saying, I think I'm going to get it. I'm not sure. I think I'm going to do it. My parents are old, whatever. But you are the ones who are literally saying, maybe don't, which is really surprising. So why is it that doctors turned on you the way they did?
No, it's a great point. I mean, if you look back at when the mandates were coming out, you know, you've got to have your 2 jabs to be able to work. And if you don't, you're not a very, you know, caring doctor, you know. And there was 100,000 doctors, like that's why they were called NHS 100K. There were many more than that. You've also got The fact that I think the data at the time was 80% of NHS staff across the board stopped having their jabs after 2. Even more, revelation, I had 2. Did you know that?
Right.
2 jabs. I'm a vaccinated.
No.
I had 2. So I'm not like this cavalier guy who didn't do, for king and country and all that. I did it. I took the first one because I was told I was saving my patients, stop transmission, etc. Only to find out after it's gone into the arm and around my entire body, and I became a spike protein machine forever and ever, that, I'm a vaccinated anti-vaxxer. So to go back to your question, I don't know. I look back at the sort of culture in the NHS. Doctors are positively selected to follow, to learn rote learning. So you just learn to regurgitate, to spot patterns. But bearing in mind, I've got a comparator. I did the first degree in science. So that was always the opposite: question, critique. Whereas in doctors, you sit in lecture theatres and you're told. And through my early career, and I cover this a bit in my book, is that I've got these egocentric surgeons, orthopods, and vascular surgeons, just egos, and there's a massive bullying culture in medicine, in nursing, and in medical doctors as well. And there's really ironic that there's this thing it used to be called whistleblowing protection in NHS. You always get about a 2-hour speech from these wonderful people at the start of any job in your induction, and they tell you, free to speak up. They've changed it now. They've made it a little bit more fluffier. They call it freedom to speak up guardianship. You try and speak up in the NHS. If you speak up, you may as well collect your P45 and get it on the way out. So yeah, I'm shocked that like I get so many phone calls and text messages from doctors saying, we stopped after 2, or we didn't think there was. But I'll give you a key example. I worked at a surgery where 3 nurses had myocarditis or pericarditis after 1 or 2 of their jabs. They flat refused to have any more, based upon their own ill health.
What does that mean for listeners unaware?
The inflammation of the heart, or inflammation of the sac that the heart sits in. And it's pretty catastrophic. As you can imagine, the heart's a pump. If it's inflamed, it's not pumping efficiently. And, whenever you damage heart muscle, it's like central nervous tissue. It doesn't regenerate. And I'm calling out at the start of the pandemic that young people are getting myocarditis. That was a really early warning signal. And I'm going into my coffee room saying, why are we giving 12 to 17-year-olds? Look at this study. And you're getting pushed by the physio saying, I don't want to listen to your conspiracy theory. But going back to those 3 nurses, they wouldn't have any more jabs, but they were only too happy to do the booster regime for the 3rd one. They were jumping for joy. They were administering drug to kids, pregnant women. My question is why? I can't get my head around the psychology of that. If I say no to something, I'm damn well not going to be promoting it in my patient population.
Yeah.
And there is a snitch element to doctors. Doctors snitch. Like I say, when I've gone through my 256 complaints, I'd probably say about a third of them are doctors. 2/3 of them are anonymous trolls. I don't know who they are because the GMC redact the information. I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question. They're my ideas. I don't know. I mean, these doctors, as you say, the flu uptake was even worse. The flu uptake, I think, was 90% of NHS staff stopped. They didn't have any. So 90% by that measure of doctors and nurses are anti-vaxxers. Or what are they seeing? What were those doctors seeing that stopped after 2, like I did? They're seeing it. I hear about it all the time. Doctors now, if you saw a 25-year-old chest pain in A&E, I'd clark them in. I'd probably do a chest X-ray if I had to tick the box. But the differential diagnosis is benign. It's either going to be costochondritis, musculoskeletal, bit of pleurisy, nothing to write home about. But now you've got to make sure you do the full shebang. And I keep hearing from people who come to me that the doctors are whispering in their ear, how many jabs did you have? How many? Oh, do you think it's because of the jab, doc? Oh, yeah, probably. I've sat with coroners who've told me categorically that the death of the person that they're doing the PM on, when I've been asked by a family to observe, is the vaccine, only for that same coroner, not only to refuse to do tests to check for spike protein on the tissue he's taking, we don't do that, to then go to the inquest and say natural causes, when he's told me in the coffee room, well, what else can it be? She died 2 days after the jab. Her body's riddled with fluid that shouldn't be in these cavities, and I've never seen such pathology in a specimen before. And then publicly goes...
Why are they scared to speak out?
Well, that guy in particular sent me a picture of his house on a cliff edge, said that this is the reason. He was quite open. He's got a posh big house and a big mortgage. He was... So, yeah, I mean, look, ultimately, I used to call it Wakefielding somebody, and I was warned at med school, if you speak out about vaccines, you will be Wakefielded, and the finger was wagged like this. And now, I call it being Cartlanded, because... I get this a lot. We don't speak out. We see what they've done to you. We see what they've done to Mohammed Adil, Sam White. They've destroyed your life. And now, in your case, you can't even blow a whistle at the weekend at the Dog and Pheasant FC. You know what I mean? So literally, I smile, but it's sick. And I don't know. If I knew the answers to this, I'd be going after these people. I'm trying to find at the moment. I need a barrister. I'm broke. I need a barrister that's willing to just take a risk on this situation. I hope somebody hears this, or any of the other interviews I'm doing in the next few weeks, because all I've got is my reach now. And I just want one barrister to say, okay, I'll do this, no win, no fee. And I've said to them, look, if you win compensation, you can have it all. I don't want it. I've got a beautiful family, a lovely home, lovely life down it. Well, it was a lovely life. And, if you win £1 million compensation for this, have it. But just promise you'll work pro bono, so I don't have to worry about the stress of getting into crippling debt to fight to clear my name. Do you know what they wanted, the GMC, for an appeal? They wanted 20. I just spent 80 grand for the barrister for 6 weeks. They wanted 20 grand plus VAT to do an appeal in the month after. And if you lose, you pay the GMC's costs, which were £6,000 a day per barrister and legally. He's got that sort of money. And then after the month elapsed, I had 2 more months to do a judicial review. So 3 months from the date of strike off. And that you're looking at 50 grand just to start the case. And these barristers, they go through money like you wouldn't believe. I know that. So what normal punter has just been rendered unemployed and kicked out of his 120 grand a year salary with no other plans? Because as a doctor, you've trained all your life, you're typecast. What else can I be? Now I'm looking at life thinking, well, what am I going to do? I did science. Even in the nursery, I had the stethoscope and I was going around the nursery as a 6-year-old, like listening to people's hearts. That's all I know how to be, and it's been pulled away. And I don't know how to deal with that personally. And then the only bit of joy I have is refereeing. They've took that. They put me on a list of criminals. And this is all pretty attritional. And yeah, if anyone wants to offer me a job, by the way, watching this. I'm good at cleaning. I don't even know if I'm allowed to clean floors, actually. I've got to check.
It's such a. I can't even imagine how traumatic this experience has been for you in terms of the last 3, 4, 5 years. This is absolutely awful.
I reached out to a doctor to me for some sleeping tablets about just after the strike off, and I told him a little bit of. You only get 5 minutes with a doctor, don't you? And I was trying, bearing in mind, doctors should really make a bit of time for fellow doctors. I always used to, but maybe I was an exception to the rule. I asked for some sleeping tablets. They literally fought me all the way for 5 sleeping tablets. I was insomnia. I told them about the trials and some of this. The next thing they did, you know what they did? And my wife was in this very room. I was having the court out here. They put the phone down to me. They picked up the phone to my wife, broke my confidentiality and said, we're concerned about your husband. Are the trolls in the room with him now, kind of thing? He sounds very paranoid and delusional, like trying to make it out that it was all in my head, like they do the vaccine injuries. They've all got mental health referrals. Yeah. They've all been told they're psychiatric patients, not genuinely injured people. So it's a very crazy world. I can't, wake up every morning trying to solve the mystery, but I haven't worked it out yet. Who these people are, who pays them, why me? Why Dave Cartland, Danny Cool, why haven't they gone for, the richer doctors first? But that's it. It's easy pickings. I can't challenge these things. If any judicial review looked at this, and I've only touched on some of it today, how do they justify in a judicial review that Dr. Cartland's not allowed any of his witnesses? And when we ask the reason why, they say, we're the GMC, and we say so. You're not allowed to, entrapment, we spoke about the vaccine exemptions. If you honey trap somebody or agent provocateur them, it's called entrapment, and that's not admissible in a court of law. But the GMC wrote to me when I made that point and said, well, we're the GMC, we can use whatever we want. We can even include hearsay in our evidence bundle. Meanwhile, I had a doctor in my bundle. I had a doctor who was an ex-doctor when I was an A&E doc, who said, amongst 200 and odd other aggressive tweets where I won't go into detail, but they were pretty sordid stuff. And he said, I'm going to come down to Cornwall, hunt you down and slit your effing throat, or words to that effect. Death threat.
Bloody hell.
That went to the GMC. About 3 days later, I get a letter back saying it's not reached threshold for investigation. So we tried to make the point that if you're not investigating this doctor, here we are. 3.5 years have passed. The day I started my tribunal, 3.5 years have passed from the crimes I'd committed. And in that time, I'd had there'd been no restrictions on my practice. The beautiful GMC folk decided at that time, at the beginning, when they received the accusations, they hadn't even spoke to me at this point. They write a letter to every surgery that I worked at in Cornwall. and I never worked at any of the practices again. I've seen one of the letters. It says, to let you know, FYI, your locum Dr. David Cartland has been accused of and faces a fitness to practice tribunal for bullying, harassment, incitement, and falsification of medical notes and dishonesty. Now, and I've seen the bottom of the letter, they say, have you got any concerns about Dr. Cartland you'd like to share with us? So phishing. I never worked at these practices again, and I've barely worked in 3 years. Barely worked, other than the time of the second half of the tribunal where I did 6 weeks working at surgery. I was very open about what happened. I went through the charges with the practice. They were about to offer me a job, and guess what? 2 individuals rang the surgery on my last day, males. Does Dr. Cartland work at your surgery? Yes, he does. Just to let you know, X, Y, Z about me, even though I've been open. If you don't sack him, we'll go to the press. If you don't sack him, we'll go to CQC. That very evening, after I was driving 2.5 hours there, 2.5 hours back to this surgery, how did they know I was there, number one? But number two, I got a 7 o'clock sheepish email from the senior partner saying, we're going to let you go, we don't want the controversy. And that was the last day I worked as a doctor. At the time I was being hugged by the doctors, and the paramedics were coming in saying, you're that Dave Cartland guy, aren't you? Let me give you a hug. Patients were doing selfies with me. I was doing autographs for them as well as, this is how it was at that surgery. And then they let me go. They just let me go because it's easy for them to do that. And that's the culture in the NHS. Under the carpet, sweep it, and anything bad, loads of stuff going on in maternity units. There's loads of stuff going on in oncology suites. We're getting younger people with aggressive, incurable stage 4 disease. The oncologists must know that. And all they need to do is, how many did they have? Just mentally correlate. I was seeing infertile men. On 1 week I saw, a week and a half should I say, I saw 4 men with infertility. They had no sperm in their ejaculate. 3 of them were 3 times jabbed, and 1 of them was 4 times jabbed. I didn't see any unjabbed with azoospermia. This is an infertility issue. Then you see midwives reporting that placentas are coming out dishevelled and calcified and dusky and hypoxic. They're having to give CPR to normal vaginal deliveries. People dying in just normal labour in figures that are just going off the scale. And people are raising concerns, and they get outed. They get managed out. This is what they do, rather than say, we've got a problem here. We've got a problem. We need to deal with it. Like the AstraZeneca, when I mentioned it to the doctor, we've got a problem here. We've had 2 deaths and we've had 1 cerebral venous trauma. We've got to stop. We've got to investigate. And lo and behold, what happens 6-8 months later? They pull off the AstraZeneca jab. It got banned. Johnson & Johnson got pulled. So it's not as if they haven't been pulled from the market to back my position.
David, what I find interesting is you've mentioned it a few times, and you mentioned it there in terms of vaccine-related injuries. So my first thing with COVID, I think, was around May 2020, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty certain it was May 2020 where I saw this data and this is when I really started to really flip on COVID and everything in regard to lockdowns and what was going on. And I saw it was the lowest recorded month of cancer being recorded in the UK since data had been around. And I remember thinking, that is absolutely terrible, because people are so scared to go to their GP over a virus we now know, or a flu, whatever, that has 99.9% mortality, that they're not getting diagnosed for early stages of cancer. So what's going to happen like in a year's time, 2 years' time, where it may just be really early stages and so easily curable? And I'm guilty of it. I've got an older dad, and I would have probably been around March, April time. If he's got a cough, I probably would have been like, Dad, just stay at home. It's probably not worth it. Whereas that was completely wrong, because it would be much better for him to get treated. So I want to ask a question in terms of how many deaths, or not even number, but do you have an idea of just the amount of deaths that could have been avoided in the first place? And then second, do you have an idea of vaccine-related injuries in terms of the scale?
The answer is no and no. The reason being is, it's not being ignored. I'll answer the second question first, if that's right. So, vaccine injuries, it's not a thing. Doctors don't even know they injected mRNA and lipid nanoparticles into patients. If they see a vaccine injured, they're not reporting them. They're gaslighting them. They're investigating them. And they're telling them that there's nothing wrong because they're doing the wrong tests. For example, myocarditis we talked about earlier, they're doing echoes and they're doing ECGs and this, and they're telling them all the tests are normal. They're not doing gadolinium enhanced MRI scans, which is the gold standard for that. So if you don't look, you don't find. And like I say, I don't know. You can't estimate something that isn't being acknowledged. Do you see what I mean? And that's the problem with
Yeah.
that, and if doctors are going to keep gaslighting, they're certainly not reporting. I did an audit once, asked 19 people if they knew what the yellow card was. I kid you not, one person knew what the yellow card was. That's the reporting system. This is how the adverse events lists on drugs in the BNF are added to, or on patient leaflets. And if people don't know what it is, they're certainly not completing them. And if they're being told, I think I've got a vaccine injury, you've got the whole difficulty around correlation doesn't equal causation. How do you prove it? I've had people
Mm.
being told that the stroke they had the day after the vaccine was absolutely nothing to do with the vaccine. It was from, brace yourself, asymptomatic long COVID. Just get your head around that for a little concept. COVID that they had no symptoms of, but never tested positive for. This is genuine. I was marched out of a surgery for calling out the doctor for this. I won't say where I was about to then, but I won't control myself. Yeah, he basically said that it's you can't prove that it was the vaccine. I went, and you can prove it was asymptomatic long COVID. How so, mate? And he's like, oh, you're putting ideas in the patient's heads, telling them the vaccine injured. You need to. This was a 30-year-old nurse, peg fed, aphasic, couldn't speak, wheeled into my room. She took Zeneca, blood clot, Zeneca, blood clot, Moderna, stroke. That was her life, and now she's dead.
Bloody hell.
This is what we got. So if they're not added to the poll, we can't guesstimate. Hence, if there isn't a problem because no one's admitting to it, then we can't find a solution. That's why us dangerous doctors are working day and night researching. And what was the first part of the question? Remind me, sorry.
The how many people do you think, because of how strict COVID was in terms of not necessarily just vaccines, but how we were scared as a population to go visit our GP, go visit doctors, go to hospitals, over COVID, over that spell? Did you see afterwards the repercussions of that?
Like you say, outpatients were closed, elective surgeries were halted, staff were redeployed to the front lines. The evidence of that I saw in real life were empty hospitals. I saw it with my own eyes. My surgery itself was empty. I was in Kidderminster at the time at a massive federation practice, 30,000 patients. You could hear a pin drop. It was me and another doctor manning the fort while all the other doctors worked from home. It was dead. And you're quite right. I mean, again, it's an innumerable amount of people. How do you work it out? Because, if you've had 3 or 4 weeks of bloody diarrhea, normally you go and see your doctor. But like you said, the old ones in particular were saying, I don't want to bother them. These guys are, they're watching the BBC, seeing these hazmat suit wearers and packed ITUs with crisis actors, patients. And there's me visiting hospitals that are empty. So these guys are, this is this delayed diagnosis. So there is a factor when you look at the turbo cancer and the cancer numbers, and the same with everything else. If you're not having your elective surgery, then you're at higher risk of complications of not having the surgery. So who knows the figures? But, on top of that, put it this way, COVID didn't kill many people. You look at the metric they used, COVID, with death within 28 days of a positive test. How useless is that as a metric? You can have a test tomorrow. The tests, as you know, dodgy as. You can get run over by a tractor down here in Cornwall. You can get run flat out to the ground, roadkill, and you'd be added to that ticker tape going across the BBC. COVID deaths. My own friend was a COVID death. Absolutely not. We haven't even touched on what the ITU protocols. So we're getting people on vents that were sat here like me and you having a conversation with oxygen saturation settled at 99 with nasal spec oxygen. And they were preemptively ventilating them because they said, well, we know COVID is going to rip through their lungs and it's going to turn their tissue into literal tissue paper. We need to get them on the vent nice and that. You don't ventilate somebody who's got a patent airway. One particular case, it was somebody that was FaceTiming me saying they're trying to ventilate me, Dave. What do I say? And they're saying it's the preemptive ventilation from the COVID protocol. And no one really could tell me what that COVID protocol was. And you just wonder how many people were put on preemptive ventilations. And then once they're under, same as what happened to my friend, you're subject to iatrogenic harm, which means harm inflicted by the medical profession. There were a lot of deaths from that, believe me. Aside from, we're not talking about my dad's mum in the nursing homes, but an overzealous use of end-of-life care. But what a mess. What a mess. Just
Yeah.
chaos. This is pee up in a brewery stuff. This is like... I was watching my doctor. I was actually watching my doctors like putting yellow and black tape across alternating urinals. I was watching my doctors, telling patients that, you can go out and have a meal, but as soon as you stand up, you're at risk. The protective effect of a steak dinner. They were telling patients, to get vaccinated after they'd recovered from a disease. Just get your head around that. I mean, that is basic immunology. If you've recovered from a disease last week, you certainly don't need to have a vaccine for that disease for a good while, until the antigenic drift and shift kicks in. And they were telling people, first question in the vaccine queue should have been, "Hello, Doris, how are you today? Have you had COVID recently?" "Yes." "Oh, you can leave the queue now." That's it, end of story.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They were like, jab them, then they jabbed them again and again and again, and systematically ruin their immune system. This was a bad idea. I mean, even you've got to remember, doctors don't do immunology. I did immunology in my first degree, and you don't vaccinate mid-pandemic for starters. I won't get too scientific on you, but you just don't. You get vaccinated ahead of a winter season so that you build up immunity. As soon as you vaccinate in the middle of a peak, you're creating a bit like antibiotic resistance. You keep giving the same antibiotic, you get resistant bacteria. If you give a vaccine in the middle of a peak, these coronaviruses are quite good at escaping. Yeah, and that's what they do. It's called escape variants or antibody dependent enhancement. So they dodge the bullet, and then it induces a rapid mutation rate, in all directions. So and even the fact they give it a vaccine in the arm, it induces a blood-borne vaccine immune response. And actually, again, I won't turn it into an immunology lecture, but you need IgA, secretory IgA antibodies for respiratory tract infections. When you have an injection in your arm, it encourages IgG and IgM, which is blood-borne antibodies, which is no good when it comes to a respiratory tract virus. So even at the basic level of 101, first lecture in immunology that you ever have, doctors were just ignoring and flouting this stuff, like giving people 10 jabs in the end. I think at the end of my career I met people that had 10, and surprisingly they played Russian roulette 10 times and they're absolutely fine, whereas I know that people have had 1 or 2 and lost legs, as you mentioned Alex earlier.
Alex, yeah.
Makes no sense.
Crazy. I mean, Alex, I've got sorry, Dave, I've got so many questions more to ask. I'm conscious of timing. We have a closing ritual on this show where I ask the guests for an unpopular opinion that they have that they think should be popular. So yeah, it can be anything we've discussed in the last hour or so, or it can be something completely random.
I'll keep it on subject really. My unpopular opinion is that the whole medical profession is bought and paid for by Big Pharma, and Big Pharma is run by psychopaths. And when I say psychopaths, I mean the worst sort of psychopaths. We've seen it lately with the Epstein files, just how dark it gets. Just how dark it gets. These elites, these people at the very top, even above the government, they are evil. I mean, this week and the week before, I'm sick of reading reports about rapists and paedophiles and child pornographic images and sex parties. And these people run the show, and the people who've got the money. And yeah, I think it's central around Big Pharma, and I think it's evil. I think Big Pharma is the end of I'm a Christian, so I believe everything. We've got everything on the earth. People in the Bible lived till they were 400. They didn't have to rely on Pfizer and Moderna. You look at the genealogies of people in the Bible or whatever holy book you prescribe to, and say, look, these people lived well. Where there's a stinging nettle, there's a dock leaf. You know what I mean? That analogy. So the people who've hijacked natural things. I mean, we've just had a ban on mushrooms. They're vilifying things like cannabis. These are natural leaves and mushrooms here that help in human health, yet somebody somewhere thinks it's okay to ban. What right do Big Pharma have? And the reason is because they want to monopolise health, and Big Pharma keep you unhealthy. That's an unpopular opinion. Big Pharma is there to keep you unhealthy. It's a great business model. A lot of the drugs you take, if you take a drug and then you take it for a year and you stop it, your symptoms will rebound. I'll give you an example. Acid pills, blood pressure pills. If you stop your acid pill, you get really bad acid, like worse than ever before. So what do? You reach for your acid pill and start again. If your blood pressure pill stops, you get a spike in your blood pressure. So what do? You reach for your blood pressure pill. So yeah, it's an endless business model. A patient cured is a customer lost. That's my unpopular opinion.
I think there'll be so many people watching this podcast that will 100% agree. We've had similar people. I don't know if you know Laura Delania, who's talked a lot in this podcast about she was somebody who throughout her whole life had mental health issues, depression issues as a child, and she was given all these pills. When she got into her 30s, she realized that she had serious problems. She never had any sex drive her whole life. She had serious levels of she completely plateaued. She'd ruined so much of her body. and she had to like slowly get off these tablets, and she's written so many books on it. And when listening to her, people like yourself, I mean, I think everything you're saying, I think there'll be so many people, although maybe unpopular in the mainstream, I feel like a lot of people are definitely waking up to this.
Yeah, that's a group that the public, the government need to, and the medical profession have to be a bit fearful of. I speak to these people. So you've got the original people that rejected all COVID measures. You've got the people over here that will take 25 jabs till they die, and they believe everything on the BBC. You've got this ever expanding group. I had one this week. Somebody got really ill after their sixth jab, simultaneously with his wife as well. So this group are angry. I see them. I see the steam coming out of their ears when they realise they've been turned into spike protein factories with no off switch. You know, they're fed up of going to funerals every 2 weeks, getting their black tie out. People are twigging it. You don't need to be a doctor now. The doctors know. The patients know.
Yeah.
And the cards are about to fall down. And I've got a cigar ready for that day. I tell you, it's ready to go.
Well, Dave, it's been so good speaking to you. Maybe we can do this again. I've still so many questions, but it's been really, really amazing speaking to you. And best of luck with your journey. We'll put in your details in the description of this of YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so people can reach out to you if they can help in any way. And to our listeners, if you can, please do. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, Dave.
No worries, and thanks for your time too.